My name is Margaret Thompson, and I've been working as a housekeeper for wealthy families for over 30 years. In all that time, I've seen the best and worst of human nature. But nothing prepared me for what I witnessed on a cold December morning in 2019 at the Blackwood Mansion. This is the story of how a few words changed a millionaire's heart forever, and how a disabled boy's courage taught us all about the true meaning of strength. Richard Blackwood was everything you'd expect from a self-made millionaire. At 52, he had built a financial empire worth over $200 million. Through ruthless business practices and an unwavering belief that weakness had no place in his world, he lived in a sprawling mansion in the hills of Beverly Hills, surrounded by luxury that most people could only dream of. Richard was a man who measured everything by success and profit. He had no patience for what he called life's losers, people who, in his view, hadn't worked hard enough to achieve greatness. This philosophy extended to his personal life, where he had little tolerance for anything that reminded him of vulnerability or limitation. I had been working for Mr. Blackwood for 3 years when the incident occurred. He was a demanding employer, but he paid well, and I needed the job to support my own family. Over the years, I had learned to navigate his moods and his harsh judgments, but I had never seen him display the level of cruelty that I witnessed that December morning. It was a Tuesday, and I was preparing breakfast in the kitchen when I heard the doorbell ring. Mr. Blackwood was in his study, reviewing financial reports, as was his morning routine. I went to answer the door and found a young boy standing on the doorstep, no more than 12 years old, with leg braces and crutches supporting his small frame. "Good morning, ma'am," the boy said with a bright smile that immediately warmed my heart. "My name is Tommy Martinez. I'm selling Christmas cards to raise money for the Children's Hospital. Would you be interested in buying some?" Tommy had cerebral palsy, which affected his mobility, but his spirit was absolutely radiant. Despite the obvious challenges he faced, just standing at our door, he spoke with confidence and genuine enthusiasm about his mission to help other children. "These are beautiful, sweetheart," I said, looking at the handmade Christmas cards he had carefully arranged in a small box. "How much are they?" "They're $5 each," Tommy replied. "All the money goes directly to buy new equipment for the children's therapy room at St. Mary's Hospital." I was reaching for my purse when I heard heavy footsteps behind me. Mr. Blackwood had emerged from his study, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "Margaret, what's taking so long?" he demanded, then stopped when he saw Tommy at the door. His expression immediately shifted to one of disdain and impatience. "Sir, this young man is selling Christmas cards for charity," I explained. I can see what he's doing," Mr. Blackwood interrupted, his voice cold. He looked Tommy up and down with obvious disgust. "And I can see what he is." Tommy, still maintaining his cheerful demeanor, extended one of his cards toward Mr. Blackwood. "Would you like to see the cards, sir? They're really pretty, and they help kids like me get better equipment for therapy." What happened next will be burned into my memory forever. Mr. Blackwood looked at Tommy with a sneer that made my stomach turn. "Listen, kid," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "I don't buy things from people who can't even stand up straight. If you can't walk properly, maybe you should focus on fixing yourself before trying to help others." The words hit Tommy like a physical blow. I watched as the light in his eyes dimmed, and his cheerful expression crumbled into hurt and confusion. I just wanted to help," Tommy whispered, his voice barely audible. But Mr. Blackwood wasn't finished. "You want some advice, kid? Stop wasting people's time with this charity nonsense. The world doesn't owe you anything just because you're broken. Successful people don't have time for sob stories." Tommy's hands began to shake, and I could see tears forming in his eyes. He struggled to maintain his balance on his crutches as the emotional impact of Mr. Blackwood's words overwhelmed him. Maybe I should go," Tommy said, his voice breaking. That's when something inside me snapped. I had watched Mr. Blackwood be cold and calculating in business, but this was different. This was pure cruelty directed at a child who was only trying to help others. "Mr. Blackwood," I said, my voice steady but firm, "I need to speak with you. Now." "Margaret, I don't have time for now," I repeated, stepping protectively in front of Tommy. Mr. Blackwood, surprised by my assertiveness, reluctantly stepped back into the foyer. I turned to Tommy, who was still struggling with his emotions. "Tommy, sweetheart," I said gently, "why don't you wait right here for just a moment? I'd like to buy some of your cards." Tommy nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "Okay, ma'am." I followed Mr. Blackwood into the foyer. closing the front door behind me. He was already turning to walk away when I spoke. "Mr. Blackwood, what you just did was unforgivable." He spun around, his face red with anger. "Excuse me, I don't think you understand your place here, Margaret? I don't need lectures from the help." "No," I said, my voice growing stronger. "I don't think you understand. That boy out there has more courage and strength than you've ever had to show in your entire privileged life." "That's enough." "No, it's not enough," I interrupted. "You want to know what real strength looks like? It's a 12-year-old boy with cerebral palsy getting up every morning, putting on his leg braces, and going out into the world to help other children, even when people like you try to tear him down." Mr. Blackwood's expression was a mixture of shock and fury. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone he considered beneath him. "You think you're strong because you have money," I continued. "You think you're successful because you can buy anything you want. Let me tell you something about that boy. He faces more challenges before breakfast than you face in a year. And he does it with a smile." "Margaret, you're fired," Mr. Blackwood said coldly. "Fine," I replied without hesitation. "But before I go, let me tell you something that might save what's left of your soul." I took a deep breath, knowing that what I was about to say would either change everything or mean nothing at all. "That boy you just humiliated. His name is Tommy Martinez. 3 years ago, his parents died in a car accident, the same accident that caused his cerebral palsy. He's been living with his grandmother, who works 3 jobs to pay for his medical treatments. Despite everything he's been through, despite the daily pain and the challenges he faces, he spends his free time raising money for other sick children." Mr. Blackwood's expression began to shift, but I wasn't finished. "You want to know what he told me when I asked him why he does it? He said, 'My legs don't work right, but my heart works fine, and I want to help kids who are scared like I was.' That, Mr. Blackwood, is what real strength looks like." For the first time since I'd known him, Richard Blackwood was speechless. The color had drained from his face, and I could see something shifting behind his eyes. "And you know what the most heartbreaking part is?" I continued. "After what you just said to him, he'll probably go home and blame himself. He'll think that maybe you're right, that maybe he shouldn't be trying to help others. A 12-year-old boy will question his worth because a grown man was too small to see past his disability." I walked toward the door, then turned back one final time. "I've worked for you for 3 years, Mr. Blackwood. I've seen you make million-dollar deals without blinking, but today, I watched you destroy a child's spirit for free. I hope it was worth it." I opened the door to find Tommy still waiting, his Christmas cards clutched tightly in his small hands. His eyes were red from crying, but he managed a weak smile when he saw me. "I'm sorry I bothered you," he said quietly. "Oh, sweetheart," I said, kneeling down to his level. "You didn't bother anyone. You're doing something beautiful and important." I pulled out my wallet and took out a $50 bill. "I'd like to buy 10 of your cards, please." Tommy's eyes widened. "But ma'am, that's too much. They're only $5 each." "Then consider the extra money, a donation to the hospital," I said. "From someone who believes in what you're doing." As Tommy carefully counted out 10 cards for me, I could see Mr. Blackwood watching from the window. His face was pale, and his expression was troubled in a way I had never seen before. "Thank you so much," Tommy said, his smile returning. "This will really help the other kids." "Tommy," I said, "I want you to remember something. What that man said to you in there, that wasn't about you. That was about him. You are strong, you are brave, and you are making a difference in the world." Tommy nodded, though I could see he was still hurt by Mr. Blackwood's words as I watched him make his way down the long driveway. Struggling with his crutches but determined to continue his mission, I felt a mixture of heartbreak and admiration. This boy had more character in his small frame than many adults I had known. Asterisk. I didn't know it then, but my words to Mr. Blackwood had planted a seed that would grow into something extraordinary. The encounter with Tommy Martinez was about to change Richard Blackwood's life in ways that none of us could have imagined, because sometimes, it takes the innocence of a child and the courage of someone willing to speak truth to power to crack open a heart that has been closed for too long. The days following my confrontation with Mr. Blackwood were unlike anything I had experienced. In my 3 years of working for him, after I was fired, I expected never to see him again, but something extraordinary began to happen that would change both of our lives forever. I had returned home that Tuesday evening, Still shaken by the encounter with Tommy and my subsequent termination, my husband, Robert, listened patiently as I recounted the events of the day, his expression growing more troubled with each detail. "You did the right thing, Margaret," he said, holding my hand across our small kitchen table. "That boy needed someone to stand up for him?" "I know," I replied, "but I can't stop thinking about him." The look in his eyes when Mr. Blackwood said those terrible things. No child should ever have to hear that. What I didn't know was that at that very moment, Richard Blackwood was sitting in his massive empty mansion, unable to get Tommy Martinez out of his mind. For the first time in years, Richard couldn't focus on his work. The financial reports that usually commanded his complete attention lay forgotten on his desk as he replayed the morning's events over and over in his mind. My words echoed in his head. "That boy has more courage and strength than you've ever had to show in your entire privileged life." The next morning, Wednesday, I received a phone call that surprised me completely. "Mrs. Thompson, this is Richard Blackwood." I was so shocked to hear his voice that I nearly dropped the phone. "Mr. Blackwood, I need to ask you something," he said, and his voice sounded different, uncertain, almost vulnerable. "The boy from yesterday, Tommy, do you know how I can find him?" "Why?" I asked cautiously. There was a long pause before he answered. "Because I need to apologize." I was skeptical. In 3 years of working for him, I had never heard Richard Blackwood apologize for anything. "Mr. Blackwood, if this is some kind of, it's not," he interrupted. "Margaret, what you said yesterday, about the boy, about his parents, about what he's been through. I can't stop thinking about it." I could hear something in his voice that I had never heard before, genuine remorse. "His grandmother's name is Rosa Martinez," I said finally. "They live in the apartment complex on Maple Street, near the hospital." "But Mr. Blackwood, if you're planning to hurt that boy again, I'm not," he said quickly. I need to make this right." After hanging up, I spent the rest of the day wondering if I had made a mistake by giving him that information, but something in his voice had convinced me that his intentions were genuine. That afternoon, Richard Blackwood did something he had never done in his adult life. He drove to a poor neighborhood and knocked on the door of a modest apartment. Rosa Martinez, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and work-worn hands, opened the door to find a well-dressed stranger standing in her hallway. "Mrs. Martinez," Richard said, his usual confidence replaced by nervous uncertainty. "My name is Richard Blackwood. I met your grandson yesterday." Rosa's expression immediately hardened. "You're the man who made my Tommy cry." The simple statement hit Richard like a physical blow. "Yes, ma'am, I am. And I'm here because I need to apologize to him, and to you." "Tommy is at school," Rosa said coldly. "And I don't think he needs to see you again." "Mrs. Martinez, please," Richard said, and for the first time in decades, he found himself pleading. "I know what I did was unforgivable, but I need to try to make it right." Rosa studied his face for a long moment. "Why?" "Because," Richard said, struggling to find words for feelings he had never acknowledged before. "Because that boy is everything I'm not. And because I've spent my whole life thinking that strength meant never showing weakness. Never helping others, never admitting when I'm wrong. But yesterday, I met a 12-year-old boy who showed me what real strength looks like." Rosa's expression softened slightly. "Tommy comes home from school at 3:30. He'll be doing his homework until dinner. May I wait?" Rosa looked at this powerful man standing humbly in her doorway and made a decision that would change everything. "You can wait," she said, "but you need to understand something first. That boy has been through more pain than any child should ever have to endure. If you hurt him again, I don't care how much money you have, you'll answer to me." "I understand," Richard said quietly. Rosa led him into their small but immaculately clean living room. The walls were covered with Tommy's artwork and school certificates, and Richard found himself studying each one with growing amazement. "He's a Strata student," Rosa said, noticing his attention. "Never missed a day of school, even when he's in pain from his therapy sessions." "Therapy sessions?" 3 times a week, Rosa explained. "Physical therapy to help with his mobility. It's expensive, but Tommy never complains. He says it's worth it if it helps him help other people." Richard felt something crack inside his chest. "Mrs. Martinez, how do you afford it all? The medical bills, the therapy, ... Rosa's pride was evident in her voice. "I work 3 jobs. Cleaning offices at night, serving lunch at the diner, and doing laundry for the hotel on weekends. Tommy helps when he can, but mostly he focuses on school and his charity work. He's raised over $3,000 for the Children's Hospital this year, Rosa said with obvious pride. Every weekend, he goes door to door, selling those cards he makes. Sometimes people are kind, sometimes they're not. But he never gives up. Richard felt ashamed in a way he had never experienced before. Here was a family facing challenges he couldn't even imagine, and they were spending their time and energy helping others. At 3:45, they heard the sound of crutches on the stairs outside. Rosa went to open the door, and Tommy came in, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his face lighting up when he saw his grandmother. He called out, then stopped when he saw Richard sitting in their living room. The joy drained from Tommy's face, replaced by the same hurt and confusion Richard had seen the day before. Tommy, Rosa said gently, Mr. Blackwood came to talk to you. Tommy looked between his grandmother and Richard, uncertainty clear in his young eyes. Richard stood up slowly, his heart pounding in a way it never had during any business negotiation. Tommy, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, I came to apologize. Tommy didn't respond, just stood there gripping his crutches, waiting. What I said to you yesterday, Richard continued, was wrong. It was cruel, and it was unfair, and I'm sorry. Okay, Tommy said quietly, but Richard could see that the boy was still hurt. No, Richard said, it's not okay. What I said was more than wrong, it was evil. And I need you to know that it wasn't about you, it was about me. Tommy tilted his head, confusion replacing some of the hurt in his eyes. Tommy, can I tell you something about myself? Richard asked. The boy nodded slowly. I've spent my whole life thinking that being strong meant never needing help, never showing weakness, never caring about anyone but myself. I thought that because I had money, I was better than other people. Richard sat back down, bringing himself closer to Tommy's eye level. But yesterday, when I met you, I realized something. You have something I've never had, real courage, real strength. You face challenges every day that would terrify me, and you do it with a smile. And instead of feeling sorry for yourself, you spend your time helping other children. Tommy's grip on his crutches relaxed slightly. I was mean to you because you reminded me of everything I'm not, Richard continued. You reminded me that I'm the weak one. I'm the one who's broken inside. You're not broken, Tommy said softly, and the kindness in his voice nearly broke Richard's heart. Yes, I am, Richard replied. But maybe you could help me learn how to be strong like you. Tommy looked at his grandmother, who nodded encouragingly. I don't know how to teach that, Tommy said. Maybe you could start by showing me, Richard said. Maybe you could tell me about your charity work, about the children you're helping. And so, in that small apartment, something miraculous began to happen. Tommy, with his grandmother's encouragement, began to tell Richard about his mission to help other children at the hospital. He showed Richard the thank you letters he had received from families, the pictures drawn by children who had benefited from the equipment his fundraising had purchased. With each story, with each letter, Richard felt his old worldview crumbling, and something new taking its place. Tommy, Richard said finally, would you let me help you? With your charity work? Tommy looked surprised. How? However you need, Richard replied. Money, yes, but more than that. I want to learn from you. I want to understand what it means to really help people. Tommy smiled for the first time since Richard had arrived. Really, really. And in that moment, Richard Blackwood began a transformation that would change not only his own life, but the lives of countless children who would benefit from what Tommy Martinez was about to teach him about the true meaning of strength, courage, and compassion. 6 months after that life-changing afternoon in the Martinez apartment, Richard Blackwood was a man transformed. The change hadn't happened overnight. It had been a gradual awakening that challenged everything he had believed about success, strength, and what truly mattered in life. I had returned to work for Mr. Blackwood 3 weeks after our confrontation, not because he had asked me to, but because I had seen the genuine change beginning in him and wanted to be part of whatever was happening. Margaret, he had said when he called to ask me to return, I need your help, not just with the house, but with learning how to be a better person. Tommy is teaching me things I never knew I needed to learn. The Richard Blackwood who returned from that first visit to the Martinez home was different in ways both subtle and profound. The cold calculation that had once defined his every interaction was replaced by something I had never seen in him before. Genuine concern for others. His partnership with Tommy had begun simply enough. Richard had written a check to the Children's Hospital for $10,000, the largest single donation in the hospital's history. But Tommy had surprised him by asking for something more. "Mr. Blackwood," Tommy had said during one of their weekly meetings, "money is really helpful, but could you maybe come with me sometimes? When I visit the kids in the hospital." "Visit the kids?" Richard had asked, the old discomfort with vulnerability creeping into his voice. "Yeah," Tommy had explained with his characteristic enthusiasm. "Some of them get scared about their treatments, and I like to talk to them. But sometimes they ask questions I don't know how to answer, especially about business stuff." "You're really smart about that." And so Richard Blackwood, who had spent his entire adult life avoiding anything that reminded him of weakness or suffering, began spending his Saturday mornings in the pediatric ward of St. Mary's Hospital. The first visit had been transformative. "Mr. Blackwood," Tommy had said as they walked through the hospital corridors, "some of these kids are really sick, and some of them might not get better, but they're still kids, you know. They like to laugh and play games and hear stories." Richard had nodded. But nothing could have prepared him for what he encountered in that children's ward. The first child they visited was Maria, an 8-year-old girl with leukemia who was undergoing chemotherapy. She was bald from her treatments, pale and thin, but when Tommy entered her room, her face lit up with pure joy. "Tommy," she had exclaimed, struggling to sit up in her hospital bed. "You came back." "Of course I did," Tommy had replied, making his way over to her bed with his crutches. "I brought someone special to meet you. This is my friend Mr. Blackwood." Maria had looked at Richard with curious eyes. "Are you sick too?" The question had caught Richard off guard. "No, sweetheart, I'm not sick." "Then why are you here?" she had asked with the direct honesty that only children possess. Richard had looked at Tommy, then back at Maria. "Because Tommy is teaching me how to be a better person." Maria had smiled at that. "Tommy's really good at that. He taught me that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do good things even when you are scared." Those words had hit Richard like a lightning bolt. Here was an 8-year-old girl, fighting for her life, teaching him about courage. Over the following months, Richard's Saturday hospital visits became the most important part of his week. He met children facing challenges that dwarfed any business crisis he had ever encountered. Yet they faced these challenges with a grace and strength that humbled him completely. There was David, a 10-year-old boy with muscular dystrophy, who spent his time in the hospital writing stories to entertain the other children. There was Sarah, a 6-year-old girl with a rare heart condition who made friendship bracelets for every new child who came to the ward. There was Marcus, a 14-year-old with bone cancer who had started a support group for other teenage patients. Each child taught Richard something different about resilience, about finding joy in small moments, about the power of helping others even when you're struggling yourself. "Mr. Blackwood," Tommy had said during one of their visits, "do you see how they all help each other? Even when they're sick, even when they're scared, they think about making other people feel better." Richard had seen it, and it had changed him fundamentally. But the most profound change came when Richard decided to expand their efforts beyond the hospital. "Tommy," he had said one Saturday afternoon, "what if we could do more? What if we could help not just the children in the hospital, but children like you who are facing challenges at home?" Tommy's eyes had lit up with excitement. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if we started a foundation? A real organization that could help families who are struggling with medical bills, who need equipment, who need support." And so the Tommy Martinez Foundation was born. Richard had used his business expertise and connections to create something extraordinary. The foundation provided financial assistance for medical treatments, purchased adaptive equipment for children with disabilities, and created support programs for families facing medical crises. But more than that, Richard had insisted that the foundation operate on principles that Tommy had taught him, that every family deserved dignity, that help should come without judgment, and that the goal was not just to solve problems but to empower people to help themselves and others. "Mr. Blackwood," Rosa Martinez had said during the foundation's first board meeting, "I never thought I'd see the day when the man who made my grandson cry would become his biggest supporter." "Mrs. Martinez," Richard had replied, "your grandson saved my life. I just didn't know I needed saving." The foundation's first major project had been to create a scholarship program for children with disabilities who wanted to pursue higher education. Tommy, despite being only 13 by then, had insisted on being involved in the selection process. I want to make sure we pick kids who understand that having a disability doesn't mean you can't help other people, Tommy had explained. Kids who want to use their education to make the world better. Richard had watched Tommy interview scholarship candidates with a maturity and wisdom that amazed him. This boy, who had been mocked and dismissed by Richard just months earlier, was now his most trusted advisor on matters of the heart. The transformation in Richard's personal life had been equally dramatic. The cold, empty mansion that had once been his refuge became a place of warmth and connection. Tommy and Rosa became regular dinner guests, and Richard found himself looking forward to their visits more than any business meeting. "You know," I had told Richard one evening as I prepared dinner for one of these gatherings, "this house feels alive now. It feels like a home." "It is a home," Richard had replied. "For the first time in my life, it's actually a home." The change in Richard hadn't gone unnoticed in his business world either. His approach to negotiations had become more collaborative, his treatment of employees more respectful, and his business decisions more ethical. Some of his old associates had been puzzled by the changes, but Richard no longer cared about their opinions. "I used to think that being ruthless was a strength," he had told Tommy during one of their conversations. "But you've taught me that real strength comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down." 1 year after their first meeting, Richard organized a celebration for the foundation's anniversary. The event was held at the Children's Hospital, and it brought together all the families they had helped, the medical staff who had supported their efforts, and the children who had inspired their work. Tommy, now 14 and more confident than ever, was the guest of honor. A year ago, Tommy said in his speech that evening, "I met someone who taught me that people can change. Mr. Blackwood was mean to me at first, but he learned how to be kind. And that taught me something important. We should never give up on people, because everyone has the ability to become better." Richard had tears in his eyes as he listened to Tommy speak. This boy, who had every reason to hold a grudge, had chosen forgiveness and had helped transform not just Richard's life, but the lives of hundreds of other children and families. "Tommy," Richard said when it was his turn to speak, "taught me that true wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in the lives you touch, the people you help, and the love you share. A year ago, I was rich but poor. Today, thanks to Tommy and all of you, I'm truly wealthy for the first time in my life." As I watched Richard that evening, surrounded by children who adored him and families who had been helped by his foundation, I marveled at the transformation. The cold, cruel man who had mocked a disabled boy had become a champion for children facing challenges, a source of hope for families in crisis, and most importantly, a true friend to the boy who had taught him what real strength looked like. Tommy Martinez had not only forgiven Richard Blackwood's cruelty, he had transformed it into compassion. And in doing so, he had proven that sometimes the greatest victories come not from fighting back against those who hurt us, but from showing them a better way to live. The millionaire who had once mocked a disabled boy had learned the most valuable lesson of his life, that true power comes not from what you can take from others, but from what you can give to them. And it all started with a 12-year-old boy with leg braces and crutches, selling Christmas cards to help other children, and refusing to let one man's cruelty diminish his determination to make the world a better place. Legal notice: this story is completely fictional and was created for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real people, living or dead, or real events is purely coincidental. **